Woodrow Wilson wrote this. He said, democracy is bound by no principle of its own nature to say no to itself as to the exercise of any power. So once you've got the votes, once you're in office, you're not abridged from doing anything you want. Walter Williams defines democracy this way. Democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. That's one of the rule of law is important. That's why we don't want pure democracy, because in that scenario, the minority loses and loses big. Purpose of government. Well, the Declaration again made that pretty clear, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. It didn't say anything about a Federal Trade Commission, or a Federal Election Commission, or an EPA, or whatever. The purpose of government was to protect people's rights, because basically they could do everything else themselves. But it was the government that they established to secure rights. Principle of government, federal versus national government. Now this was what I was getting back to before about the passage of the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. Under the original Constitution, the House of Representatives was supposed to represent the interest of the people. The United States Senate was supposed to represent the interest of the states. And the reason the founders did that was because, once again, they feared centralized authority. They wanted the state governments and the federal government to compete with each other. They wanted to be power to be dispersed between the state governments and the federal government. As soon as we started having the direct election of senators, this whole concept of federalism was on the slippery path down the toilet. Because now you did not have a body of the U.S. Congress who was there essentially to protect the prerogatives of the state governments. So the state governments lost big time. The ideal model for Woodrow Wilson, which he made clear in a number of his writings, was he didn't even like our system of government. He liked the parliamentary system that they had in England, because under that system, the people do lose their sovereignty, and the powers of the executive and the power of the legislative body are essentially merged, which if you happen to be the guy at the top, you kind of like that idea. Separation of powers. Once again, the founders did everything they could do, everything they could think of, to try to disperse power. You have the federal government, you have the state government. Inside the federal government, you have an executive, legislative, judiciary. In the states governments, you have executive, legislative, judiciary. But the main idea here was to decentralize power. For Wilson and the progressives, the separation of powers had come out of the founders' obsessive fear of majority tyranny, and thus they thought the system was outdated for the present age, where the government no longer represented a danger to the people. So we don't need separation of powers anymore, because we promise to be good boys and you don't have anything to fear from us. Another difference. Founders' time, there was Orthodox religion. And by that, certainly there were differences. You had Puritan New England, you had Quaker Pennsylvania, you had Catholic Maryland, you had Anglican Virginia, and certainly there were differences between these groups. You did have these fights going on between organized religion, but you could still say this was Orthodox religion, that a lot of these people agreed on some of the same tenets in their religion. Back in the early part of the 20th century, they developed what was called the social gospel. Now this was kind of interesting, because social gospel adherents considered it to be their mission to fulfill, not in the next life, but in this life, the New Testament's call to bring about the perfect kingdom of God. The social gospel theologians asserted that government was now in a position to bring about an earthly utopia in the form of the modern democratic state. There was a guy named Walter Rauschenbusch who criticized Orthodox religion for being too individualized. He thought Christians should focus on salvation in this life by concentrating on, quote, social goals achieved through the state. So now, there's this antagonism today between liberals and conservatives, and liberals say, you know, those old fundamentalist dullards, all that they ever want to talk about is same-sex marriage and abortion. Well, problem is, those two issues weren't real big back in the early part of the 20th century. The reason that Orthodox religion had to be demonized, because in Orthodox religion, people have an ultimate concern, that is God. That is where their loyalty lies. And the progressives could not allow that. The ultimate loyalty, the ultimate concern of the population had to be the state. Walter Rauschenbusch also wrote that we had to overcome man's attachment to private property, removing private property rights as an obstacle to social action. We shall have to re-socialize property, by which he meant that property was being made to serve the public good, either by the service its uses rendered to public welfare or to the income, quote, the income it brings to the public treasury. So your property's gone because the state can use it more effectively. Philosophy of education. Up through the 1800s into the early 20th century, the whole purpose of the education system in this country was to take the individual child and maximize the abilities and aptitudes of that person. John Dewey is probably the most prominent name in American public education. And John Dewey made it real clear. He wasn't interested in the aptitudes of the individual child. He thought the purpose of the public education system was to make each child an indistinguishable cog in society. So it didn't matter what the child might be interested in, what he had aptitudes for, whether he was smart, whether he was dumb. He needs to go through the mass production process, and on the other end, he comes out a cog or citizen of the state. Woodrow Wilson said, "Our problem is not merely to help students to adjust themselves to rural life, but to make them as unlike their fathers as we can." Foreign policy, last point. George Washington kind of established our foreign policy, and it went on for about 120 years or so. And George Washington's line that you hear repeated quite often is, he said, "It is our true policy to steer clear of entangling alliances with any portion of the foreign world." George Washington was smart enough to know, we got this big ocean over here, we got this big ocean over there, let's take advantage of it. Let's keep our nose out of other people's business and make sure they keep their nose out of our business. And not get mixed up in all these foreign intrigues that are always going on in the courts of Europe. Woodrow Wilson, though, in 1917, made famous his line that he's remembered for, that we must make the world safe for democracy. Kind of interesting from two perspectives. He didn't say we must make the world safe for republics or for natural rights or for private property. We must make the world safe for democracy, and if we just have to go out and kill people, we'll do that. Wilson made it clear that in the future our foreign policy would champion the rights of mankind rather than be a way to protect the nation in the interest of the nation. Now, Sam Adams, the founding father, said it slightly differently. He said, if you love wealth better than liberty, the tranquility of servitude than the animating contest of freedom, go from us in peace. Crouch down and lick the hands which feed you. May your chains sit lightly upon you, and may posterity forget that ye were our country. Kind of the same idea. The idea that we have to get off our duff and fight for what's ours. And I think that's what all you people are here today. And that's all I've got for you.